Good evening. Good evening, everyone. All right, I promise you we're going to have time to hang out afterwards. But we've got a very, very big treat tonight. As part of the Clinton Presidential Center Presents, we have with us Dr. Cynthia Osborne from Vanderbilt University discussing the Prenatal-to-3 State Policy Roadmap and its findings. So we are going to be digging into that in just a moment. Before we begin, though, I want to first thank you all for coming. This is an issue area of vital concern. We are a school that trains our future leaders of public service. We're a master's level institution, so our students are usually 22 and above. But the truth of the matter is that your education, your public service leadership journey starts way before that. It starts, I would argue, in the prenatal stage. And so having this spotlight on Prenatal-to-3 is professionally important to me, but also personally very important to me. So I am thankful for all of you being here tonight. My colleague, Dr. Jay Barth, over from the Presidential Library is with us. Dr. Dean Campiris, one of our Dean's Advisory Board members. We have two of our alums, Dr. Gary Wheeler and Anna Strong. So good to see you back here at the Clinton School. A little bit about the Prenatal-to-3 Impact Center and about Dr. Osborne. This is an academic research center, a nonpartisan research center that provides rigorous research, but most importantly, it translates the research, because we can do research all day long, but if it is not applicable to real life, if real people who are over there, as I'm looking at the Capitol, can't understand it, it doesn't do us any good. And this is what Dr. Osborne has dedicated her life to. I have the immense pleasure of knowing Dr. Osborne on a personal level. We were colleagues at a previous institution, and I saw firsthand how she built the Prenatal-to-3 Impact Center from an idea of wanting to bridge rigorous policy to outcomes that affect children, that affect families. And it has grown to be one of the most well-known national resources for policy impact in the prenatal-to-3, in the education space in general. And it's just been such a privilege to see her grow this voice along the way. Cynthia is a rock star through and through. I mean, I could take, 15 minutes to read her bio. She has a PhD in demography from Princeton, master's from the Harvard Kennedy School, Claremont Graduate University, all these great things. But most importantly, she has a deep passion for what she does. And she is on a mission to spread the word, spread the gospel of what a policy impact roadmap looks like. And I'm so excited that here in Arkansas, we've brought that roadmap. And I hope that we can start the journey along this map. So with that, thank you, Cynthia.
Well, thank you, Dean DeSoto. Thank you, Vicki. And thanks so much to all of you for coming out tonight and being able to have a conversation with you. And I've had an opportunity to meet many of you already, and this room is full of more experience and knowledge than I will ever hold. And so I hope that I plan to leave time to be able to engage in that conversation and listen to your questions and learn from you of what you're doing. And that's really the job that I have, is to learn what's happening and what folks are doing and what works, and share that with as many people as who will listen. And so again, really grateful for the opportunity to be here tonight with you. So as Dean DeSoto said, I have the immense privilege of being the director of the Prenatal-to-3 Policy Impact Center. And the whole purpose of our center is to be a resource for states as they try to meet their goals of ensuring that children thrive from the start. And our approach was to, as researchers, was to really dig in and understand what the research says about what works and share that with folks, so that they know that if they implement certain things, that it will actually create a difference in the lives of infants and toddlers and their parents. And as I'll share with you, there are still a lot of gaps in the research. There's a lot of things that we should know that we don't know. And so we do our own research to try to build that evidence base. And we share all the data and policy information that we have with other academics so that they will also continue to do more research and build the evidence base. But the reason why we started was not just because I really like kids. I'm a former teacher. I have 2 daughters of my own who are now grown, but it's because the science of the developing child over the last 20 to 30 years, as Jack Shonkoff says, is screaming at us. It has really helped us to understand how important those first 3 years of life are, not just for making sure that we show up to school more prepared and ready to succeed, but that they have lifelong consequences for our health and well-being. And we know that what it takes is children being able to live in safe, stable, nurturing environments right from the start with limited exposure to adversity. And that's the environment that we need to create for all kids. And it's not actually that difficult. this is a joke that I should probably just stop saying. It's not rocket science, but it is brain science, right? It's not that difficult. We don't need baby Mozarts. We don't need a bunch of technology or super, sophisticated tools. What we need are loving interactions between caregivers and the little ones. But in order for caregivers to be able to give those sorts of loving interactions, they need to have not as much stress in their lives. They need to be healthy. They need to understand how important those interactions are and to feel comfortable in that role. And so, again, it's not simple, but we do know the answer. And it's also important to understand that the science has made clear that our brains are born expecting input from their environment. Your brain is the only organ in your body that is not fully formed when it comes out of when you're born. Your little heart, your little liver, your little lungs, they're just, baby-sized versions, but they're functioning like they will as you age. But your brain is the supercomputer ready to be wired, and it's your environment, your exposures to the world around you that help it to understand, well, what's the language that you're going to speak? Who are my people? What's safe? What's scary? All of those things we're learning in those earliest years of our environment. And in fact, this graph is a little hard to see, and I'm happy we will share the slides for anyone who is interested in having them. But this graph shows that our brains have what is called this plasticity. It's this time in which our brains are most receptive to learning particular skills and basically wiring different parts of the brain that are going to be responsible for those sorts of skills as we develop. And this along the bottom axis here shows you beginning prenatally up through age 3, how this is kind of a bell curve shape where there's peaks in which you're really expecting this sort of input. And after that, it's not that you can't learn these things, it's that it's much, much, much more difficult to learn them. And it's more costly, and we don't actually know very well how to do it as well. And so things like your vision and your hearing, these are all occurring, in the first, beginning prenatally, in the first several months of life. But the part of your brain that is really the thing that sets us apart from all other mammals is this prefrontal cortex. It is the part of our brain that is about reason and delayed gratification and interactions with others and critical thinking. And this sort of what we call executive functioning, that peaks around age 3. That is the time in which your brain is really expecting, that it's been exposed to those sorts of nurturing interactions that help develop that part of the brain by that time. Now, my pediatrician friends over here are probably cringing at all the things I'm saying. I'm not pretending that I'm a medical doctor, but they're going to let me slide with a lot of this. But the truth is that it's not that you can't develop that part of your brain after age 3, but it's very difficult to do. We don't know exactly how to build those skills as effectively when your brain is not as wired for that. And if you're exposed to chronic adversity in those first years of life, that your brain is actually protecting itself. It is learning from its environment. It is building neural connections, but they're not in the place that is about safety and reason and delayed gratification and all those sorts of things. They're about, how do I get out of here when the things go wrong for me? And how do I react to environments that aren't safe? Or how do I make it so that people know I'm hungry, right? Those are the things that your brain is spending its time doing when you don't have those basics met. And this is just showing you the difference literally in the neural connections that are made between those children who are exposed to very toxic early environments and those who are exposed to normal environments. And I'm sorry you can't see this graphic very well. The colors really don't translate well into the room. But what this shows is the accumulation of gray matter. It's that kind of stuff in your brain that is all responsible for that kind of the squishy stuff in your brain that shows these neural connections, the dendrites, the kind of part of the brain that is really exercising that sort of learning. And the science has shown that kids who are exposed to high levels of resources, beginning from birth throughout their childhood, have higher levels of this gray matter that develop over the first 3 years of their life. And if you can see where it begins on the far left side, that at birth, that kind of gray matter is all very similar, but it starts to separate or kind of distinguish itself from kids who are born into environments in which there's kind of mid-levels of resources, and those who are born into environments that are very low levels of resources. There's this kind of stair step. And so what we want to make sure is that we are providing opportunities for kids right from the start to live in those environments in which they are going to thrive. We don't want to leave human potential on the table. All of these kids are born with the same sort of potential. And, sure, there's a natural variation. Some will end up, Einstein, and some will end up like my brother, but they will be all fine. Sorry, this is being taped. Sorry, Wiley. But there's natural variation, but we all have potential, and our resources of our parents shouldn't be the thing that determines what that is. So we wanted to step into this space and say, all right, so the science of developing child is clear. We know that if we can create these environments from the beginning, that children will thrive. Well, what are the state level policies that can help to create those environments in which all children will thrive? That was our big question. And so as researchers, we turned to the existing evidence, and we started to do comprehensive reviews of dozens of state level policies to understand which ones have a strong evidence base, really looking at the most rigorous research available, that if they implemented it, they saw changes in outcomes related to infants and toddlers and their parents. And we reviewed thousands and thousands of papers and hundreds of the most rigorous studies that have been conducted. And there's really 4 main takeaways from all of that. And I'll show you what the actual policies are, and that list will continue to grow as the evidence base grows. But there's really some key takeaways that are also important. One is there are things that work. I know that might sound like trust me, when we were starting on this, we weren't sure that we were going to find it. It was, there are things that we can do that actually will make a difference. And that's important to know, that the answers are there in front of us. So if you want to know how you can improve kids' opportunities, we can answer that question for you. Secondly, the research is really clear that especially for this period of development, there is no policy on the planet that can only focus on children and expect that everyone's going to be okay. That you have to care for the caregivers in order for them to care for the children. And we want them. We want the parents to do the job of raising their children. We want the educators, the early childhood educators, and the nurses, and the home visitors, and others who are in this caregiving environment to have the support and resources that they need in order to do the job that they're so well prepared to be able to do. And third is that there's no magic bullet. There is not one policy or program that we can implement and then go home and say, well, we've done it, right? So it's not just childcare, it's not just doulas, it's not just minimum wages. It requires a combination of broad-based economic and family supports and targeted interventions to meet the specific needs that families have in order to create this system of support for families that really centers the family, centers the child, and thinks about the different needs that they have. And, you know, if you think from your own perspective, there's not one thing that makes it so that you are able to be here today. It's all the things. And when you're really sick, it's really hard to go to work and do the other things that you need to do. It's hard to learn a new skill. When you don't know if you can pay your rent on time, it's very hard to have someone come to your house and teach you how to, you know, read to your kid, right? All of these things work together to reduce the stressors in families and increase the capacities of the individuals. And finally, we have monitored how states across this country, including the District of Columbia, have implemented these effective policies and strategies. And the variation across this country is vast, to the extent that where you are born, the state in which you are born, is the single greatest predictor of the level of resources that a child will have available to them when they are young. The level of benefits across the country varies a lot by design, but that has implications for children's health and well-being. Okay, so to step back for a second, I told you everything we do is based on the science of the developing child. And we operationalize that science into 8 prenatal-to-3 policy goals. So again, these are the conditions that if we could create these conditions for all children to thrive, then we would feel like kids are having that opportunity that they need to be able to develop optimally. And so these include making sure that families have access to the resources that they're eligible for, that families have the ability to both work and care for their children, that families have stability of their resources and sufficient resources where there's not food insecurity or housing instability or financial instability, that babies are born healthy to healthy parents and taking into consideration both physical and mental health, and that our parents have the knowledge and skills and real understanding of how important their interactions with their children are. Not every parent knows that smiling with your child is one of the most important things that you can do. And many of you who have worked with families may have heard families like I have say, well, why would I read to my infant? She can't read yet, right? And so really making sure that the parents understand and have that sort of skill to do what is so needed. And similarly, that when our children are not with their parents or other family members, that those caregivers also can create these nurturing environments. And importantly, we want to make sure that we can identify any sort of developmental delay that a child is experiencing and get them the sort of help and resources that they need as soon as possible to get them back on track for optimal development. So that's what we're shooting for. Those are the goals. And for each state, and again, you're not going to be able to see this, but inside this thing, which I have to say my OCD is killing me because the printer didn't fold it exactly right and it's off center. So if you all refold it, it would make me really happy. But inside you can see where for each of those policy goals, we have chosen a small number of indicators so that states can see kind of how they're doing on each of those goals, well, how their children and families are doing. And that can help them to prioritize where they may need to put some of their efforts. And we have in our roadmap online lots of detail on how each state is doing on each of these indicators, but this is a real snapshot. And so Arkansas can see where it stands relative to other states on each of these indicators, and you can determine where you may want to prioritize and also where you may be doing well and want to dig in and find out, well, what's going right there? And how can we continue to build on that? But we didn't want to stop with telling you how your kids are doing. There are a lot of really great resources out there that tell us how our kids are doing. What we wanted to do was to provide a tool or a resource to help you to make it so that your kids can do better. That will answer the question for you. If we want to improve birth outcomes, what can we do? If we want to make sure that children, parents have those skills, what will work? And so that's what we set off to do. And on the back of the handout that you have, and if you need another handout, we have more on the table and can pass more out. This is our roadmap, and I'm going to go into details about it. But going down on the left-hand side is a list of the policies and strategies that the most rigorous evidence is pointed to that says these work in improving at least one of these prenatal-to-3 policy goals. And across the top are each of those 8 goals, and you can see the alignment. So it helps states to say, okay, again, if our goal is healthy and equitable births, what are the different sort of strategies or policies we could implement to do that? I'm going to briefly go through what the list of them are so that, it's not a mystery anymore. And I also want to make sure to tell you that I understand that you are probably doing things that are really effective that are not on this roadmap. And certainly there are other states that are as well, but they haven't been studied to the level that they need to. We pay a lot of attention to what's coming out. We're following all the evidence. In fact, last year we added community-based doulas to the roadmap because the evidence began to really form to show us that sort of model of providing support in the prenatal and delivery and postnatal period really made a difference in multiple outcomes. So the policies, first to just distinguish between the policies and strategies. It's really a difference without a distinction or whatever. There's not that. Internally, it matters a lot. To you, it may not matter. But the difference is that the research on policies is pretty clear as to what the threshold needs to be for the state to do in order to actually see the benefits. So for instance, one of the policies is a paid family leave program. And the research has been done on a state that provided 6 weeks of paid leave on top of 6 weeks of medical leave. But that's all we really know. All we can really say is that if you do 6 weeks, this is what the research says you should expect. And so that's our threshold. With minimum wage, for instance, the minimum wage policies that were studied were around $10 an hour. There are now 8 states that have a $15 an hour minimum wage, and there'll be another almost dozen more within the next 5 years. So we don't have research on $15 an hour. We have research on $10 an hour. And so that's our threshold. We can provide guidance on that. As compared to a strategy, which is more of a program, that the program itself has been rigorously evaluated in multiple contexts, not just by the person who invented it and did their own studies. It had to be evaluated in several different contexts. But the research doesn't provide guidance as to exactly how the state should implement it. So centering pregnancy is, we call it group prenatal care here, but centering pregnancy is a model that has been rigorously evaluated. But there isn't a clarity on what the state policy lever needs to be in order to make it so that every family who wants to use a centering pregnancy model would be able to do that. Now, we've been hunting down by talking to the experts, you all, at the state level to identify what those policy levers might be. And we're hoping to be able to evaluate those. But for instance, with centering, a lot of states are providing enhanced reimbursement rates to OBs that offer centering pregnancy. And that's the state policy lever, but that part has never been evaluated. So we can tell you the program model is effective, that approach is effective, but I can't tell you how you should do it necessarily, but I can tell you how others are doing it, and it's a pretty good idea. So that's the difference between a policy and a strategy. So our policies, we have 4 of them, and they are these broad-based economic and family supports. They're making sure that families have access to health insurance. That's a really important one for families. Making it so that families have time after they have had a child to be able to bond with that child and heal, that their wages are sufficient in order to provide for their child. And one of the most effective policies is tax credits. And the policy that has been studied the most is an earned income tax credit. That's a kind of usually as a percentage of the federal credit. But more and more states are implementing child tax credits that are similar to what the temporary child tax credit was at the federal level under ARPA. So we'll learn more about how those work. But those are the 4 policies. And with strategies, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about each of them, but I'm happy to answer questions about any of them that you would like. So one is to really reduce the administrative burden on families. We pay attention to SNAP because that is the most robust nutrition program that we have, but we're expanding that to nutrition programs to administrative burden policies kind of across the board. I'll give you an example of why they matter. For instance, Alaska, which is kind of a big place with people living far and far out there, just this year switched to an online application system. This is being recorded. No offense to Alaska. I'm so glad that you did this. But you can imagine this 28-page application for SNAP that you had to fill out and mail in and so forth, that raises the barrier and makes it more difficult for families to be able to get access to that benefit. Child care subsidies are a similar lengthy application process. So more and more states are doing things called categorical eligibility. If you're eligible for this program and it has similar sorts of income requirements, you'd be eligible for this program too. They're doing centralized applications. So South Carolina just implemented one that has 40 different programs. If you put in all your information, it will tell you which of those 40 different programs you are eligible for, and it started to basically allow you to apply through that system for many of them as well. So reducing administrative burden so that families can access the benefits that they're eligible for. Another really important strategy is what we call comprehensive screening and connection programs. And Arkansas is actually really a leader in one of the evidence-based models, which is called Healthy Steps. There's another that's called Family Connects. And the idea of that is that anyone who is part of this pediatric practice, for Family Connects, it's anyone who's born in this hospital, or all offer this service. And it's a pretty low touch sort of service in that what they're trying to do is to really understand what the specific needs of families are. They're not offering you what they have, they're offering you what you need. And they're making those warm handoffs to folks in the community to be able to help families. So those, there's several different evidence-based models there. I literally can't even read my own print because I'm getting old, but it may be going out of your order too. So the next, and I'll talk in depth about this tonight, is childcare subsidies. And this is not to say that all of childcare is not important, but the only thing that's really been studied is the lever that states have the most, which is their childcare subsidy. And so I'll talk more about that, but that's one of the most pro-work policies that we have. I mentioned before group prenatal care. For those of you who are not familiar with that model, it's exactly what it sounds like, where the women get to meet in a group all around the same gestational age and go through their pregnancy with peers. And they learn how to support each other. It reduces their social isolation. It improves their mental health. It's a really important program. As I mentioned, we added community-based doulas to the roadmap this past year. And this is a model that is somewhat different than just a hospital-based doula, which also has a lot of value to a lot of people. But this is someone from your community who speaks your same language, who understands the same cultural expectations that you have during pregnancy, and can really work as an advocate for you during both the prenatal period and the postnatal period. They often connect you to the resources that you need and offer that important support. So in addition, we have looked at home visiting models. And again, Arkansas is one of the national leaders in how you've really thought about administering your home visiting programs so that they're more centralized and organized. We focused on the ones that really have an emphasis on parenting. Home visiting models can focus on a lot of different things. The research is the most robust about improving parenting skills. So that's where we focus a lot of our efforts. And despite the fact that there is a lot of energy around home visiting, still in most states, there's no more than about 5% of eligible kids who get access to this program. And that's true for nearly all of these strategies, is that although they work, they're just very limited in their reach. So it's like having this magic thing over here and not getting it into the hands of folks who can use it. Our early Head Start programs, both home-based and center-based, are effective strategies. And Arkansas is one of the few states that actually is their own grantee. And our early intervention programs, these are Part C programs that are really essential as part of this system of care of being able to help kids who have some sort of developmental delay or at risk for one, and getting them the services that they need. So again, I'm not saying that other things don't work, but they have not been studied. And when they are, we will add them to the roadmap. We also have a roadmap for each state, and I'm not going to go through all of Arkansas's roadmap, but it is on the inside fold here, just a brief summary. And online, we go into more detail than you probably would like to know. But we help states to get a snapshot of where you stand and where you may want to focus more of your efforts. And Arkansas actually has 2 of the 4 evidence-based policies. So you have both expanded Medicaid and you have a minimum wage that's $11 an hour. And in terms of those levers that we have identified as what states can do to try to make it so that more families would have access to these evidence-based strategies, both your child care subsidies, the home visiting programs, and early Head Start, all of those, you are kind of meeting those marks. But there are places in which you may want to continue to work toward to both increase things that you're already doing and maybe fill out more of the roadmap as you meet your goals. What we do within the roadmap is we look at what all states have done and try to understand how the variation in policy choices is aligned with differences in policy outcomes or outcomes for families, and to just really provide this overview of what is possible and then work with states to inform them on what they may want to do differently. And we chose just a few of the policies so that you could get a sense, if you are interested in looking at the roadmap in more detail, of the type of information that we do provide. Arkansas is one of the 40 states that have expanded Medicaid, and which allows more families access to health insurance, families up to 138% of the federal poverty level. There are still 10 states that have not. North Carolina did just this past year, and it's looking like Mississippi will this year, and there's other states that are still like really close, so we're paying close attention to that. And this is a really important policy for children and families, that it improves birth outcomes. It's one of the few policies that we have that reduce disparities in birth outcomes. and it improves families' financial security. It's also linked to reducing incidences of child maltreatment. We often talk about health policies to audiences that are not necessarily in health, that they're in other areas like economic security or child maltreatment. And we can demonstrate that these are policies that kind of meet families' needs in myriad ways. And I won't go into the specifics of Medicaid and why it was important to be able to offer it to more families. But in states that haven't expanded Medicaid, the threshold of income that parents need to have in order to qualify is quite low. So prior to moving to Tennessee a few years ago, I lived in Texas for 17 years. And there, after you have a baby and you're a parent, if your income is more than 16% of the federal poverty level, which is around $3,000 at that point, that you're not eligible for Medicaid and you don't make enough to be able to buy it on the marketplace. And so that's that coverage gap that a lot of families fall into. And you can see, I know it's hard to see the numbers here, but across the country, there's wide variation in the percentage of, in this case, it's lower income women who would be eligible for Medicaid, who are of childbearing age, who do not have access to health care. And this is important for them when they become pregnant. It takes them longer to get access to prenatal care. They're not actually getting the preconception care that they need, like folic acid and other sorts of important vitamins and screens for your own health and well-being. And you can see that in some states, like Vermont, the percentage is extremely low. And in my former state of Texas, it's nearly half of lower income women of childbearing age who don't have access to health insurance. So another one is a state minimum wage. And I realize in a lot of states that this is not an area of policy that people are paying a lot of attention to. But now there are, this is a policy, in fact, that has a lot of important benefits for families. And I'll go through those in a minute, but Arkansas is one of the 30 states that has a minimum wage that's at least $10 an hour. And every other state that does not have that threshold is at the federal minimum wage, which was set in 2009, which is $7.25 an hour. And although not a lot of people still work at the minimum wage, there are still over 2 million people in the country who would benefit by raising the minimum wage to at least $10 an hour, 2 million workers. And it actually makes it so that folks who are, if you raise your minimum wage, it helps others just above that. And the minimum wage is actually really important for family economic stability. That's not too hard to kind of understand from a theory perspective. But it's also one of the most effective policies that we have at improving birth outcomes. That higher levels of wages leads to greater economic stability and lower stressors and better ability to access the resources and services that you need while you're pregnant, and it improves birth outcomes. It's also associated with lower incidences of child maltreatment. And so it's a really important policy that often kind of gets overlooked as if, well, we're not really doing that one anymore. But like I mentioned, there are states now that are over $15 an hour. Here's a list of what states are. And that there are others that may not change their minimum wage unless the federal minimum wage is ever increased. Okay, I could go on and on about any other policy, and now I'm going to talk about child care subsidies for a second, at the risk of boring you all, but hopefully not. I'm looking at the time, and I'll go through this pretty quickly. Okay, child care subsidies are a really important part of a system of care for families. The thing about child care subsidies that we know the most is that they help families access the child care that they prefer, and it allows families to work. It's a hugely important policy for work. Only recently have subsidies really expanded to a level in which we can start to look at other things, like how they're associated with quality or increases in children's well-being. Before, the subsidies just weren't large enough, they weren't changing enough, there wasn't enough variation in order to really look at that. It hasn't been studied enough. And so we looked at 3 different levers that states have with regard to their child care subsidy policy. And currently, Arkansas is actually meeting each of these levers, but it's taken into consideration both the eligibility of what's the percentage of income that a family needs in order to be eligible for a subsidy. It's taken into consideration the level of the subsidy, so whether it is at this kind of 75th percentile of the market rate, which I could go into, but that's what the federal government says is the equal access target. We should be shooting for that so that families could access at least 75% of the child care market, given your own state's market rate. And we need to reduce out-of-pocket costs for families so that the actual cost isn't greater than 7% of a family's income. And those are the 3 different levers that we really pay attention to. Now, child care subsidies matter a lot more if more of your child care market is subsidized. In a place like Texas, fewer than 10% of all licensed slots are subsidized. So they can do a lot with child care subsidies, but it's not going to influence the market that much. Whereas in New Mexico, I think it's something like 44% of all slots are subsidized. I'm going to find out what the number is in Arkansas because we don't know that yet. But that's an important number to know because then you know whether subsidies are making a big deal or could make a bigger one. And these charts just really show you the variation across these 3 levers across states. And so this is looking at the percentage of state median income in terms of that for families' eligibility. And the federal government allows you to make it so that families who are at the 85% of the state's median income are eligible. And there are some states that are doing that, and you're one of them, and there are other states that are still about half of that and have a lot of room to make more families eligible. If you make more families eligible, you have to increase the supply, and that's not a simple thing to do. So states are grappling with how to do that. And this is looking at the out-of-pocket child care expenses and the percentage of a family's income. And this is just to show you that although you are paying at the 75th percentile of the market rate, and that's commendable, that the bar on the far left here is the estimate of what it actually costs, the true cost of providing care for an infant in this case. And this includes making sure that the ratios are set the way that they should, that there's an extra person in the space so that you're not actually violating the law when you step out of the room to go to the restroom because there's not enough adults in there with all the children. It is not your highest quality that you could ever imagine, but this is what the cost of true quality looks like. And for every state, that bar is much higher than even the 75th percentile, because the 75th percentile is based on what providers can charge, because it's what families can pay. And it's families are struggling to pay that. I'm not going to go through these because they get a little bit confusing. I said I wanted to leave time for conversation, and so I'm going to wrap up here. But I want to tell you about how these policies intersect to create a level of resources that families have available to them to really illustrate that variation that I mentioned across states. And so we use a stylized family of Lena, who has an infant and a toddler, and she just had her baby at the first of the year. And she works full-time all year round at a minimum wage job. And she took off for the 12 weeks that she is allowed to under the Federal Family Medical Leave Act. So it's unpaid in states that don't offer paid leave. And importantly, she files her taxes and she actually is eligible for and receives every sort of benefit that she applies for. So she's not on the wait list for a child care subsidy. She gets her SNAP and WIC and so forth. She sends her kids to a child care center that charges the 75th percentile of that market rate. So we can compare across all states. And she has to send her kids to child care so that she can work. So let's look at Lena and what that looks like for her. This is a very hard thing to see, and we have it online and you could spend all day on it. But what it's meant to show you is that there's huge variation in Lena's resources based on the state in which she lives. That if Lena lives in the District of Columbia, she has over $47,000 a year at minimum. She works a minimum wage job to provide for her child. And if she lives in the state of Georgia, she has just over $20,000 a year working full time to be able to provide for her child. And it also shows you how those resources really vary based on whether they're coming from her wages or whether they're coming from government assistance. So in DC, it's mostly wages. In Georgia, it's mostly SNAP, basically. And just to show you in Arkansas what your numbers look like is one, the wages that Lena has are somewhat higher in Arkansas than they would be in some of the neighboring states because you have a higher minimum wage. But because you don't have a paid family medical leave program, then when Lena takes those 3 months off, she loses a quarter of all of her wages, right? And I don't think that we're walking. Oh, good. Yes, we are walking through it. Sorry, I was thinking that I needed to wrap up and this slide wasn't here. So she loses around $5,000 in her wages because we don't have a paid family medical leave program here. And remember that she has to send her kids to childcare in order to work. And if she were to pay out of pocket for childcare without a subsidy, it would cost her about $14,000 a year for her child. And although that is a lot of money, that is not as much as some other states. Your market rate is relatively low. But because she has a subsidy, in this case, all of her childcare costs for Lena and her income level would be covered. So she gets to preserve her income there, which is very different than in Georgia, where she would lose all of her income out-of-pocket childcare expenses. And then you can add in the resources that she would get from SNAP and from WIC and from the federal Earned Income Tax Credit and Child Tax Credit. And that shows you that her resources really are nearly doubling because of those benefits. And there are not additional tax credits, but she does have to pay some state taxes. And so the last line just shows you where she is in terms of total resources, taking into consideration federal and state taxes and all the benefits that she's eligible for. So Lena has around $35,000 a year to be able to provide for her child. That's if she has all of the things that she's eligible for. And that makes it really difficult for her to do that. That's better than a lot of states, but it still is a struggle for someone who's working full time and trying to raise her kids. And you can, let's see, I'm going to go through to sum up here so I can hear from you guys. Anyway, the whole point of what we wanted to make tonight is all of the things that we're doing are because we know how important those earliest years are for children's healthy development. But we have answers of things that will actually work, that states can do and local communities can do to help to improve those environments, to really create those environments in which our children are thriving. And that will make a huge difference for children, not just in the short term, but across the long term. We've been doing a lot of benefit cost analyses and return on investment at different states, and we're showing where a paid family leave program and child care subsidy investments and earned income tax credits within the first year are paying for themselves. And in some instances, like a PFL in Pennsylvania, it's an 18-to-1 return in the first year. So, this is things that we can find ways to do that will have a really big impact on the individual, on society, and on state coffers too. So I'm going to stop my remarks there and would really love to hear from you what your questions are. So thank you. Sorry I spoke for so long too.
Thanks, Bob. Thank you very much for being here. So I want to talk about one particular intervention, which is the home visiting programs. And I know that it's an area where Arkansas needs that intervention very badly because those are some of the most troubling. Nurturing home environment, parent-child environment is really important. And Arkansas does poorly there. But in working on that issue, I've heard over the years a lot of concern that, you know, we have a culture in which there's concern about government officials or perceived government officials kind of coming into homes, and rightfully so in some cases because of communities, you know, rancorous relationship with police and other authorities. So have you seen an example of a state that has kind of reframed that issue in a way that actually makes people much more open to home visiting that might, you know, culturally have some concerns about it?
Yeah, it's such an important question. You know, it's really important that these are all voluntary programs, that these are programs that the families are wanting. And, but sometimes they don't know that they would be beneficial to them. There is really strong research that suggests that when there's cultural congruence between the home visitor and the client and the family, that the relationships are stronger and the benefits are greater. In Minnesota, they have done an interesting thing with their home visiting and other sorts of programs, is that they've given families basically vouchers. And they put it in the hands of the family to say, here are the types of services that are available to you, and you could use this for that. And it empowers the family to say, oh, I would really love it if someone were to come in and help me to really understand how to deal with this kid. Or maybe I don't need this home visiting program. I need a parenting program that is more like this. And so when there are options, that seems to work pretty well for families. It puts them in the driver's seat of feeling like they can do that. We evaluated Texas's home visiting program from the start, and I can see the brief right now with the title that retention begins at recruitment, because what they were having is that they were signing up a bunch of families and they were all leaving within a couple of months. And it was really important for them not to just meet a family that looked like they have 3-year-olds in a Walmart parking lot and say, hey, you know, you'll help me meet my numbers, but to really walk through what the program is and what they'd be getting out of it and what they'd have to put into it. And that helped them both increase their numbers, but especially increase their retention. And I think that program models are becoming more and more aware that, you know, many of us don't stick with things for a very long time. How many of you have a gym membership that you didn't use as much as you probably could have, right? Having someone come into your house for 2 years every month and sticking with, that's hard to do, especially because they're coming in at that witching hour of, you know, kids home from school and work and getting dinner and to bed. They're not that simple. And the pandemic actually taught us a lot about how we can be more accommodating for families and flexible and do some things remote and so forth. So I think it's also a little bit of flexibility and learning how the models can adapt to the needs of families. But I think this idea of empowering families and understanding that it is voluntary, the child welfare piece is something that we can't necessarily get around. That we all know that they're going to be, mandatory reporters if they go into a home. But that's something that you talk with the family about. And for the most part, I bet that when we looked at the big numbers, the number of home visitors that are doing the reporting is very low. So I don't know what it's like here. But I do think that building the trust and having the home visitors really come from the community will go a long way.
I have a question here. Thanks, Dr. Osborne. That was a wonderful presentation and scientifically right on.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
You've mentioned these important policy things that we need to do, that the data is screaming that we do these things, and yet it's not getting done. So it seems like your all's center is in an incredible position to actually study legislatures as a behavioral challenge and try to figure out how to create the right environments to get these things kind of passed. Our experience has been that children actually are somewhat nonpartisan and are a great place to go. In our state, we now have a mother as a governor, so that's a unique situation too. And yet the two policy levers that we had, one was in a prior administration where we really just had democracy work really well. People from both sides came together to do the Medicaid expansion. The second one, the minimum wage, was by ballot initiative. And so I'm interested in strategies that you all have identified through your work in the multiple states that we might implement here.
It's a really important question. We are seeing somewhat of a bifurcation across the country. As we have been, this is our 5th roadmap this year. We will be coming out, and there are states that are making really big investments, and other states that are slower on making some of these investments. And we're interested in working with the states that are lagging behind because they need us more than some of the others. So we're actually trying to study this exact issue, and partly it's about how we communicate it and how we think about it, that we really do need to realize that the parents want to be in charge of their kids. They want to feel empowered, and that having them come and share that and see where there is so much common ground from families is a really important and powerful tool. States have also been asking us for different sorts of returns on investment to really try to make the case from a financial sense. And importantly, although all the long-term benefits are something that I care deeply about, elected officials have a shorter cycle. They need to show results within 2 years, or longer maybe for a senator, but they need to be able to say, if I make these investments, we can see it. And so by providing some of the ROIs that we're doing within states, we're using state data, we're showing exactly how many new people go to work and what it saves the state in terms of cost avoidance on public benefits or additional revenue from new income tax or sales tax. That has been also helpful. I've also been able to share various funding strategies so that states can think of new revenue pockets that don't necessarily increase taxes overall. So for instance, in Louisiana, they have online sports betting, which a lot of states are moving to. And 25% of the tax revenue from online sports betting has been set aside for an early childhood fund. And that is going to make a big difference. There are other states that are doing payroll taxes and tapping into their land funds if they have natural resources. But those sorts of innovative approaches seem to be catching the attention of those who, I agree with you, everyone cares about kids. And this is being recorded, so I know I should never say this, but it is true. Our elected officials are there to solve our biggest problems and to address the emergencies that are in the crises that are in front of us. And kids in this stage, even though it's the most important stage of development, and inside their brain, it is a crisis if they're not getting the types of experiences they need. It's hard to see. They're cute and cuddly. They look like they're kind of okay. We don't see that crisis. So how do we metaphorically, kind of set kids on fire? Like, how do we metaphorically really raise the understanding that this will be a crisis for this kid throughout their life, and you're going to pay for it in, education and incarceration and healthcare and so forth. So that messaging, some of our advocates are much more effective than me. They would never say that they want to set a kid on fire, but that is what we need to have a common voice. And lastly, the business community is making a huge, huge influence in many, many states. And without that, they're the peers of a lot of our elected officials. They go to church together, they go to Rotary together, and they have the ear of those who need to just know that people would have their back if they thought that, if they said, well, this is a good investment. So.
I'll add my voice to the chorus of thank yous. This was just fantastic. Really appreciate it. I have a question about the dynamism of this roadmap and the research enterprise that supports it. In particular, oriented to, talked about introducing the community-based doulas because research really brought you there. Or you mentioned about the child care subsidies, and you just haven't had enough evidence yet with respect to quality, right, to move that needle. And I'm wondering, kind of, if you could talk a little bit about that enterprise and about things you might see emerging in ways that this roadmap might change.
Right. So I'm looking for my colleague, Laura. So that's the enterprise that you see. I have a team of 35 folks who are busy at work, constantly looking for what's out there and what's being studied so that we can learn or putting our study into the field. Or providing folks with data so that they can do more of it. Some of the things that we have seen more and more, these early literacy programs are demonstrating impacts on infants and toddlers. So most of them have been studied more for the pre-K age, but we're hoping to see that soon. Tax credits, the child tax credit is now prime for studying. There have been 11 states last year that implemented a child tax credit. Minnesota's is $1,750, and most of them had been like $200. So that's per child. So there's going to be an ability to really start to see that. We know that folks are starting to look at childcare subsidies. There is a lot of federal grants out there right now that is supporting states to be able to look and see how the increase in their rates is increasing, not only access, but quality. And it's really at the community level that we're learning about the nuts and bolts of things that are working. So we're still not really doing as much of the statewide studies of what does quality childcare really look like, and how do we create it, and how do we create these connections with the parents and so forth, to get back to the peri-preschool model that so many of you are probably familiar with, but that doesn't exist anywhere right now. And so some of it's going to come from smaller studies and some's going to come from the statewide studies. But we're also looking at environmental impacts. So lead and other sorts of toxins are hugely influential, impactful on the developing brain in ways that often are permanent. And so types of programs that states can implement. We're trying to look at housing, but unfortunately, most housing is a federal to local policy, and states don't have robust housing policies. So we're trying to figure out what to look at there. For instance, we looked at some of the eviction reduction programs, and they haven't had the impact that we wanted them to. But anyway, I'm being told that I need to stop talking because I could keep going for hours and hours. But I appreciate the question, and we're going to find it as much as we can, but it's a slow process. Thank you all very much for your time, and sorry for taking more of it than I should have.
No, there are so many take-homes from tonight, but one that really stuck with me is that the kids are not okay. They may seem it on the surface, which is why it is so imperative that we center prenatal to 3 health, and that in doing so, it's a win-win-win. It's a win for the individuals, it's a win for society, and it's also a win in terms of state finances. We do see a return on investment. I want to thank you, Dr. Osborne, for coming to Little Rock, and I hope this is not your last visit, but the first of, to help us center our attention on prenatal to 3 health. On behalf of the Clinton School, of my partners at the Clinton Presidential Center, the Clinton Foundation, and the Clinton Presidential Library, I want to thank you all for coming, and I wish you all a good night and safe travels home. Thank you.